Good morning, welcome to Breakfast with John Kay and Sally Nugent.
Hello there, good morning. Our headlines today. The NHS is gearing up for a major expansion of the vaccine booster programme, with all adults in England to be offered the jab by the end of January.
Good morning. Are you saying don't to the Christmas do? Some businesses are reporting increased cancellations since the weekend over Omicron fears. We're looking at how hospitality's coping.
Disruption for hundreds of thousands of university students across the UK as lecturers and other staff begin 3 days of strike action.
More than £20 million is pledged to a new HIV action plan on World AIDS Day. We're going to be live in Liverpool, remembering some of those who've lost their lives to the disease. Good morning. Wednesday, the 1st of December, and our main story is that the NHS is gearing up for a major expansion of the vaccine booster programme, with hospitals and thousands of community sites set up to offer the jab.
The Prime Minister has said he wants all adults in England to be offered a booster dose by the end of January as part of the government response to the Omicron variant. Aruna Iyengar reports.
We're back to vaccinating on an industrial scale. Over the summer, vaccination centres opened in cathedrals, shops and football stadiums. Now Boris Johnson says they'll be popping up like Christmas trees. It's in response to the new Omicron variant, which could be more infectious than Delta.
Is this constant balancing act that the government's had to get right throughout the pandemic. The government has to get across a strong and clear message to encourage people to do the right thing.
The Prime Minister has said the government will be throwing everything at the campaign. He's pledged every adult in England will be offered a booster by the end of January. More hospitals will offer jabs, while over 1,000 pharmacies will deliver vaccines. But minutes from a meeting from SAGE, the group of experts who advise the government, warns of a potentially significant wave of infections and says the government should be preparing to ramp up restrictions.
I personally think that the restrictions that we have in place at the moment are unlikely to really stop this strain spreading in the UK, and that it's likely to increase over the next few months and potentially become the dominant strain and have higher levels of infection than we would have otherwise had.
Ministers have said their response is proportionate and further analysis of the new variant needs to take place in the weeks ahead. The governments in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have confirmed they will also step up their booster programmes. Saving lives, protecting the NHS, saving Christmas. Time will tell if the right choices have been made. Aruna Iyengar, BBC News.
Well, let's get a little more on this now from our chief political correspondent, Adam Fleming. Morning to you, Adam. Really interesting press conference from the Prime Minister yesterday afternoon, and the government really facing a difficult juggling act in the weeks ahead, aren't they?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the vaccine rollout, that's just a big practical challenge that will be up to the NHS to manage. And I'm sure there might be a few bumps along the way or a few glitches in the system which we'll spot in the next few weeks. But it will just be a case of pharmacies and vaccinators working very hard and the public responding to the text messages. So let's keep an eye on that. In terms of the balancing act, the politics of that is quite tricky, because on the one hand, you've got Labour saying that the government should go further when it comes to the travel rules, saying that they should reintroduce the idea of a test before you come back to the UK if you've been abroad. This would be in addition to the day 2 test that you have to have, the PCR test, and the self-isolation you have to do until you get that result that has been reintroduced by the government now. But then on the other side, you've got more than 30 Conservative MPs who voted against the new rules on self-isolation last night. That's the rule that if you come into contact with somebody who's diagnosed with the Omicron variant, you have to isolate for 10 days, even if you've been vaccinated. Some Conservative MPs really angry about that. Then you've got the fact that if you listen to some scientists, for example, Jenny Harries, who's one of the government's chief advisors, she was suggesting we should cut back on our socialising over Christmas. Then you've got the Prime Minister saying, no, go ahead with all your socialising. And kind of, you can understand why both people said both those things, but it's up to all of us to make a decision about what to do. And then where I think it could get very tricky is in 2 or 3 weeks' time, where there's more data about Omicron, but what if it is not absolutely conclusive and you still have an argument about, do you go further or do you pull back on what you're doing? And I think that could get very tricky, especially if the data is not super clear.
Absolutely right, Adam. Thank you very much indeed. We're going to try and be really clear with you this morning and give you all the answers that you're going to need over the next few weeks. We're going to be talking to the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, at 7:30. We will ask all of the relevant questions.
So many of those questions relate to transport and travel, don't they? Especially people who are thinking about going away from Christmas. And from this morning, actually, 1st of December, anyone travelling from the UK to Spain who's over the age of 12 is going to need to show proof that they have been double vaccinated.
Previously, a negative PCR test would have been acceptable for entry into the country, but the rules have been tightened because of concern about the new Omicron variant.
3 students have been killed in a shooting at a school in Michigan. 8 other people, including 1 teacher, were also injured in the attack, which happened in the town of Oxford, which is near Detroit. A 15-year-old boy has been arrested on suspicion of murder, and President Biden said that his heart goes out to all those affected by that incident.
Workers from dozens of universities across the UK are starting 3 days of industrial strike action from today.
Yeah, the main disputes are over pensions, pay and working conditions, and there are more worries that strikes could take place if a deal cannot be reached. Our education correspondent Elaine Dunkley has more.
Preparing for a picket line. These strikes are about pensions, pay and working conditions.
Every year we're seeing more colleagues on fixed-term contracts and really insecure contracts. You know, it's got to a point where I don't feel like I can recommend this line of work to anybody anymore, and that's really heartbreaking for me.
The average member stands to lose around 35% of their pension, which in their retirement, that obviously is going to make a really significant difference to their quality of life. But before they get to retirement, we have also seen in the last 12 years, in real terms, a 20% pay cut.
There is support for university staff amongst these students, but with fees of £9,000 a year and some lectures cancelled, they are also worried about their futures.
We're also paying for our staff to get paid decent pay and have decent working conditions, which they're not getting. So, I mean, we should be in solidarity with them because their fight is our fight.
A lot of people are very angry because they just don't think it's fair that after having a year of strikes followed by a year and a half of online learning, they've just got back to normal. Things are just about starting to get back into the swing, and then we're facing possibly months of strikes.
Universities UK, which represents Vice-Chancellors, says it's frustrating to be facing industrial action over pensions, but is working to reduce the impact on students.
There are many things that we can do in universities to make sure that the students don't suffer. We can change deadlines, we can change teaching methods, we can change assessments, we can change personnel. There's all sorts of things that we can do.
It's the start of 3 days of action, but this dispute has lasted over a decade, and with no resolution in sight, staff and students are preparing for more disruption. Elaine Dunkley, BBC News.
Around 45,000 people have spent a 5th night without power in England and Scotland following the effects of Storm Arwen. Suppliers say 90% of people who lost power have now been reconnected, with engineers working around the clock. In Cumbria, one of the worst affected regions, the council says urgent help is needed.
Really, whatever is appropriate to get the help out there to people, to get them some form of heating, to get them some form of power, and where necessary to extract people and put them in accommodation. And one of the issues is, because of all the phones going down, we don't actually know where everyone is and exactly, apart from going and knocking on doors. And clearly that takes a lot of people and a lot of resource.
A British football coach who was jailed for 25 years in the United Arab Emirates for possessing CBD vape oil has had his sentence reduced to 10 years on appeal. Billy Hood was arrested earlier this year after 4 bottles of the liquid, which contains cannabis oil, were found in his car in Dubai. He claims he was forced to sign a confession in Arabic despite not speaking the language. The UAE has denied that accusation.
Ending HIV infections and deaths in England by 2030 is a goal that is entirely within reach. That is according to Sir Elton John's AIDS Foundation. The government has pledged more than £23 million to reach that target. The new action plan will see testing scaled up in high-risk populations where the uptake is low.
My personal reaction to hearing about the action plan was one of real optimism and hopefulness. As somebody living with HIV for 25 years, I know the impact of this virus, and it's not a walk in the park. That being said, I would love to be in a position where no one has to have a HIV diagnosis. And I think this action plan will move us towards that.
See the headlines as they happen and watch BBC News live in the app and get the full story with bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.